Hopefully, you're doing well and that you're fine. And of course, before we start, I send you good blessings of good health and happiness. And we want to make sure that you arrive home safe after this amazing, beautiful event that's taking place today. And so we send blessings your way so that you can receive good travels and good health. And that's what I hope for you. Bojo, and then we maganaduk. Mazanapkin gego and abe and dishnakaz. Ginebe guk. Jabigaj wat and donjaba. Gnoje and dodem. Nishnabe nini and dao. Nimkiaj bekong ninda. Getchin and dum. Ya, mampi wiganon and guk. Tukanan. Chimgarmawat. Meanwa. Wawindamage wen. So, my name is the man who paints the rocks. I come from the place of where the serpents are painted on the rocks. And my clan is the Pike clan, the Fish clan. And I come from a very beautiful village where I live, Nimkiajbekong, which means Thunder Mountain. And I'm very happy to be able to speak to you about the Great War and about the treaty. And, these are things that I just heard growing up. A lot of old people would sit down and talk about, what happened, who was there, how these things, formulated over time. And they were always talking about it. It seemed like it was always an ongoing conversation between, these old men would be sitting around and talking about this all the time. And so that's where I got my education from. And so I don't really know what's written in the books. All I know is what I heard from my family. So this is our family perspective, I guess. And it must be known too that there's many perspectives out there and many different experiences. But what I speak of is just from my family's perspective. And I think we need to go right back to the Royal Proclamation when we talk about, treaty and the War of 1812, because that was really the first time that the British made an attempt to have access to our resources. And this is important because everything had to do with resource extraction from this point on. And so the British, of course, presented the Royal Proclamation. A lot of the Anishinaabeg people were not having it. They were going to war. And they did. So in order to prevent this war from spreading like wildfire, they, of course, came back with the wampum belt. So William Johnson came back with the wampum belt. A couple of them, the 24 Nations wampum belt and the Great Covenant chain wampum belt, to try and solidify some sort of a peace or an agreement between the Anishinaabeg and the British so that this war would end, but also to try and create a path for trading and also to secure an agreement where we would never sell our land to the French. This is important as we go along in the history of things. And of course, our people, some of our people accepted that belt. It was the Odawa people that accepted that belt. It was given to the Odawa people. And they were to be the keepers of this belt on behalf of the Anishinaabeg people. And it's a silver, and when you look at the wampum belt, it's two humans holding hands, and there's a chain that comes from their hand. And when you put the belt together, the chain links together. And the idea of that belt was that silver doesn't rust. And so the chain is represented by silver. And that every year we have to come together and we have to shine this belt. And the light that comes from the shine of the silver will always keep our path clear and straight so that we always know where we stand and that we must never interfere with each other's lives. and that we're supposed to live in peace and harmony. So in a sense, the 1764 Treaty of Niagara wampum agreements were really a peace and friendship understanding that took place between the British and the Anishinaabe. Now, of course, uh, shortly after the Anishinaabe stopped fighting the British, and a pipe was given to Sir William Johnson, and we declared peace. The Anishinaabe declared peace. But then something happened. And what happened is called evolution. What happened was the Americans, I guess, the Chimokmanug is what we'll call them, which means the long knives. They were forming their own country. They were uh, less and less loyalist in America, and they're really trying hard to confederate their people and to have their own country, which meant that they needed to have boundaries. And so there was war. Now, for whatever reason, which we know today, the British were highly instigating the Americans, and the Americans were highly instigating the British. But this was on indigenous land. There was no treaties for these lands up until that point. And so the Chimokmanug and the British, the Jaganashwag, were fighting. But we were also fighting, defending our homelands. So while they're fighting over a territorial boundary that was not confirmed by us or vetted through us, there is no treaty for this boundary. We were left defending our homelands. And during this time, in the late 1700s, at the time they're called half breeds, which is not a derogatory term. It's a term that was used in my family. My mother's that was a half breed, but at the time the half breeds, which primarily were French, were fighting alongside with the Anishinaabe during the Revolutionary War, and many fought. And of course, that war kind of came to a stalemate in a way. And again, it happened one more time, which was the War of 1812, where the Chimokmanug were putting flags on Anishinaabe lands, and it led Shingwak into a position where he had to, of course, attack Fort Mackinac. And the United States declared war on July 16th, 1812, as a result of that attack. And the War of 1812 had started. Now let's just take a quick look at this war. There was over 5,000 half-breeds that fought in that war with the Anishinaabe as alliances, because they were already allied in the previous battle for lands. And, they had a very strong connection with the Anishinaabe. They were like this. They were together like this. They were dying together on the battlefield. And the reason why they were dying together on the battlefield is because they're protecting their homes. So to suggest that the Métis just volunteered to fight and to die on the battlefield, and over 5,000 of them, it's actually unconfirmed how many there were. At that time, the registries and all of that never really, accurately supported, the half-breed population correctly through records. So if we're following the historical trend of them keeping records of half-breeds, then we would know that it would be more than 5,000. It's just a logical assumption. So I'm going to say that there is more than 5,000. But anyway, there's 5,000 half-breeds that contributed and fought along. Many of the leaders in the War of 1812, the Anishinaabeg leaders, against the Americans. And so we have to ask the question, why were they fighting? Were they fighting to do the Anishinaabeg a favor? Or to do the British a favor? Were they fighting to make sure that the British got all the land? No, you don't send your men to war unless you're protecting your families and your lands. So the half-breeds at the time, they had their land bases. They had their homes to protect. They had their way of life to protect, the future of their people to protect. And because we were so close, we were allies. We were bound together to fight with each other and to defend each other and our homes. And so that took place during the War of 1812. Now, many of them were French breeds, meaning that they had French ancestry. And certainly the language that they were using at that time did suggest French ancestry. Now, again, I have to ask the question, if they made such a large contribution in the War of 1812, what was it for? Of course it was to protect their lands. I can't stress that enough. But after the war was over, so I believe it was Christmas Day in Belgium, of all places, in 1814, they had what's called the Treaty of Ghent. And the Treaty of Ghent, they started to define what the borders of what is now known as Canada and the United States today. And, during this agreement, it was agreed that the Americans would get the South and the British would get the North. But the Métis were not invited at the Treaty of Ghent. The Anishinaabeg were not invited at the Treaty of Ghent. So how can that be a legitimate agreement when we were the majority? When Indigenous people were the majority fighting that war? The British they couldn't afford nothing. And not only that, but they were very dubious during that war. Shinguak said there was many, many half-breeds that were laying dead along with his children, meaning his warriors, laying dead on the battlefield. He said the battlefield was soaked with blood. Now, why did all those young Anishinaabeg and all those young half-breeds go give their lives up? They gave it because they were fighting for something called freedom. They were fighting for their own way of life, for their own Debenzoin. They were fighting to make sure that their life and on their lands would be continued on. That's why they died. So for us to assume that the Métis people, or the half-breeds at the time as they were called, didn't have nothing would be wrong. To assume that we weren't strong allies and that we didn't have this very strong interconnected relationship would be wrong. It was put to the test through war. And that's what made us such strong allies, is because now we've started to develop a long history of allyship. And the British didn't like it. The British hated the French breeds. So after the War of 1812, of course, which a lot of the old people had told me over the years, they felt that when the War of 1812 was happening, a lot of the British took advantage of that to kill the French breeds and to kill some Anishinaabeg to reduce the Indian problem. So at that time, the French breeds and the Anishinaabeg, free people, were known as the Indian problem. And after that, the French breeds were forced onto islands. And so we talk about, in the West, we talk about road allowance. Well, on the North Shore of Lake Huron, it was called island allowance. And so, because many Anishinaabe were fighting the Americans in the War of 1812, this illegitimate treaty was made called the Treaty of Ghent, was made. The farmers and all of the townspeople, and they wanted all of the lands because it's America, and you still had these people living there that fought them, and so they started to get flushed out, which caused a huge migration of half breeds and Anishinaabe up through Bawting, Sault Ste. Marie, and again, the Americans didn't like them, and the British did not like the half breeds either. Of course, the British were never going to support a French breed because, number one, they hated the French, and if you're a French and Indian, well, then you're the bottom of the barrel. Sadly to say, but that's how it was. The British were very, very racist towards the French breeds. And so after the War of 1812 and this massive migration that took place north, the British were forcing the French breeds onto islands. And so when I was growing up, I was taken to different islands where they lived. And, and where their graves were, where they were buried. These are old historical burial sites of where they lived. And there's stories of them not being able to have any stores or anything on the mainland. The British were trying to force them off. But there was too many of them, and they started to establish, already communities that were in play, and they started to join a lot of the communities along the North Shore that were already French breed communities. And so, Shingwak was a big advocator and a big supporter of the French half breeds because he said they fought with me and died with my warriors on the battlefield. So during this very turbulent time in history, the mining started to happen. And of course, the British were always overstepping their bounds all the time, never honoring nothing. Lying thieves they were. They started to do mining and exploration and things like that. And the half-breeds were not happy with that. The chiefs were not happy with that. So there's quite a few chiefs that were involved when they heard that they were mining at Micah Bay, Bruce Mines, and other spots. And so, of course, there was, like Chief Shawano and, Shingwak and others, and a whole bunch of Métis, Anishinaabe people came together. Again, they came together to defend their interests together on the land. And they went to Micah Bay, of course, which is, you probably all know about that. And, they gave them an ultimatum: you have to leave. And there was an uprising that was happening. And, there was the Anishinaabeg and the Métis people, again, they allied together to protect the lands from all unlawful mining. Now, that's a big deal, because then shortly after, 100 soldiers came up and they arrested the chiefs, the ones that were uh, orchestrating this, and which ultimately, was a big part in what persuaded the British into what's known as the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And so Shingwa kept saying, if you make treaty with us, you need to make treaty with the half-breeds because they should get everything that we have. I sat there many, many times listening to old people. And this is what they'd say. The half-breeds were supposed to get everything that we got. We were told during the treaty. They'd be slamming their fist on the table. That when they were done dealing with us, they were going to deal with them. And that they shouldn't be left out. That's what they were saying. I sat there, I watched them. Because they fought with us how many times? They were our allies. Those were our relatives. The only reason why the British didn't make deals with them is because they were French, they were French breeds. And they were never going to make deals with them. And they were mad, slamming their fist on the table, upset about it. And, of course, that became the truth. The French breeds, or the half-breeds, who were often bilingual, by the way, spoke Anishinaabe and French, were never dealt with after the Robinson-Huron treaties. And the chiefs were very disappointed. I know Shawano was very disappointed and Shingwak was very disappointed. And so they knew that they weren't going to make the treaties or agreements with them. So before the treaty happened, what I understand was they talked about things. And there was already established half-breed communities along the North Shore already, French breed communities. And so there was, Ba Ting was one of them. You had Bashkik which is Bruce Mines, which was another one. You had Moshwajing, which was Sprague, and later Spanish Ontario, which was another one. And so on and so forth, right down to Penetangishing. And so we were told that anything beyond Penetangishing was none of my business. Anything beyond Ba Ting was none of my business. But in that area from Penetangishing to Ba Ting, there was many different communities that were already functioning, and they were, of course, allies with the Anishinaabe, and the British hated it and was trying to kick them onto the islands. And, I think it's important to note that, these half-breeds were living beside us for hundreds of years. Now, for hundreds of years, they had a land base. Like, were they sneaking fishing? Were they sneak hunting? Were they sneak trapping? No. They had their territories that were... These things would have been agreed amongst the chiefs and the leaders of the half-breeds on where these territories were. And so at Sprague, I know, I was told by my grandfather, you can't hunt over there, because that's where the half-breeds hunt. And if you go over there and you hunt over there, it's like you're taking food out of a baby's mouth. You're not allowed to do that. And so they were hunting from Sprague, past Wagush Lake up to Kikendagaming, or the forks of the Bolin River even. And so it was at that time, because we were so related, that it's really hard to say exactly where the lines were, because families were related, and it's like, and nobody ever questioned things. Once decisions were made, that's just the way it was. But what I am here to say is that, there is 100% for sure half-breeds that had their own land base where they were fishing and hunting. 100%. How would they have survived? They would have starved to death. What, were they eating carrots the whole damn time? No, they were hunting, they were fishing, they were on the lake, they were trapping. So where's that land now? How come those lands aren't recognized now? They need to be recognized. That's what Shingwak wanted. And that's what I want too. It's about our allyship. It's about our kinship. It's about our history. And right now we're suffering a massive ecological collapse where we need people to join together. And because of our history and because of our close kinship ties and our connection to each other and the land, it's very important that we unite. We cannot fight and argue. As if we do that, we're part of the problem. We're not part of the ecological solution. We are now an ecological problem. If we nitpick at each other and argue with each other, then we are part of the ecological problem. Because now you have two indigenous people that are not working together, and that's bad, because it creates disharmony. It creates ununification that's needed for the land and the ecosystems to work correctly. We are the natural water and land protectors and defenders of our land. And so it's very, very important that everybody gets along and supports each other in our struggles for our lands, to keep them protected and cleaned forever. The future of our nations depend on that. I don't think that there's a time in history where it hasn't been more important. So we can't let, politics divide us. We can't let rights-based agendas divide us. As an Anishinaabe and as the half-breeds, we always had a responsibility agenda to each other. We're responsible for each other to make sure that things were good for the future of our peoples. We must never let that go. There's a lot of talk about hunting and fishing and all those things. And I agree that it's important that we uphold these old traditional values. So, for example, if I go to Wikwimikong, and if I want to go hunt there, I got to go offer tobacco, I got to make an offering, I got to share part of my meat. If I go into the Sprague area, where the half-breeds have their hunting land, I have to go there and give an offering, tobacco. I got to get it vetted through their protocols in order for me to hunt there. I can't just go hunt there. So these things have to be practiced, and it's very important to keep these laws in place. In. So as an Anishinaabe, I don't have the right to go hunt everywhere. I can't. I'm bound by my laws. Even in my own village of Serpent River, we have our own hunting territories where we hunt, our families. So things are very regulated, and they were done so that we could protect the ecosystems. But if the nations are not working together, and there's just this sort of free for all in hunting happening, but there's no management between the two, then the moose are being depleted, and I'm seeing it happen before my eyes. So the Anishinaabe Nation and the Métis Nation need to come together immediately, and you know any sorts of rights-based agenda, they need to throw it out the window, and they need to pick up the responsibility-based agenda, because our children need that. The animals need that. You can't have effective management between nations if they're not talking. And so I understand that there's a lot of complications with these things, but I don't care. We're grown-ups. So this is a call out to the Anishinaabe Nation and the Métis Nation. I don't want to hear no bickering or anything. We can't do that anymore. And I can say that because my mother's a half-breed and my dad is Ojibwe, so I'm both. So I can say whatever the heck I want. Nobody can say anything to me. But I believe that it's possible. I believe that uniting is very possible. I believe it needs to come up from the ground. It needs to come up through leadership. And we have to support and build each other up, because there's so many people that are already united. Like, you go to different things and there's First Nations people there and Métis people there, where it's quite evident that we're already in a lot of ways active and doing things together. And so let's build on the good things that are happening and build each other up and support each other and make sure that the equality is there for our Métis people. And I think that's really, really important. I think it's also important to note that it's not the Indigenous people that are reducing the moose populations. So it's not the Optuzi Anishinaabek, it's not the Anishinaabek, but it's primarily the non-native people that are coming in, uh, by the hundreds, by the thousands, and getting moose. And so I do want to make that distinction very clear, that it's not the Métis or the Optuzi Anishinaabek, and it's not the Anishinaabek that are making the moose disappear. It's things like forestry and pollution and just a whole bunch of non-native people coming in and getting the moose. And so I don't want to leave the impression that it's any one demographic other than non-native people. And I can say that for certainty because I see it with my eyes. And, we have to join together, and we have to make sure that our livelihood is protected for future generations. Also, I wanted to talk about the term half-breed and those types of things. So, when I was younger, some people find that word derogatory. When I was younger, it was not. So my mother called herself a half-breed and was very proud to be so. And my father was a full-blooded Ojibwe Indian, Nishnabek. And a lot of the half-breeds, They were called Optozenishnabek, which meant that they were, uh, you know, mixed. Optoze. And and that's what they were calling themselves, and that's what a lot of our people were calling them too, Optozenishnabek. And so some of the islands were called that. Some of the bays were called that because, of course, of the island allowance that took place. And so the term Métis was never used in my area. There was no Red River cart. There was none of that sort of, uh, culture uh, that we often so see. That's in reference to Métis people. That was never really a part of the of my what I seen growing up. But I remember hearing them speaking the language, the Optozinishnabek speaking their language. I remember them telling me stories about pictographs and traditional things. They were very respected. I remember speaking to an elder not too long ago from Penetangishing. Of course, I'm always interviewing everybody all the time, and I asked him. I said, "What nation do you come from?" He says, "Well, I come from this nation," and he pointed at the ground. He says, "This is where I come from. This is my nation here." And and that's very powerful because his nation just didn't include people. His nation included the animals and the lands and the plants and the trees and everything else. And so that's the mindset of who we are as Indigenous people. That we're just a part of something much greater than what we think sometimes. That we're a part of all creation, and that we've been invited and webbed into this beautiful blanket of life. And I believe that's a very beautiful thing. And so I know today that there's a lot of conflict around the term Métis, and I don't know how to fix that. It's not my place. I think you can get the most powerfulest computer in the world to try to fix uh, some of these issues regarding terminologies and all this, and it ain't going to do it. All I can tell you is that the people of Sprague, their language will tell them who they are. The people of Penetangishing, their language will tell them who they are. The people of Ba Ting, the people will tell them who they are. The people of Mtigok those people will tell them who they are. The people of Bashkik their language will tell them who they are. And that's why language revitalization is so important. They weren't speaking Michif along the North Shore, like the Michif from out west, because I used to hear them speak all the way from Ba Ting all the way to Penetangishing. They were speaking uh, a different kind. They were speaking like a Nishnabemo and a bit of a French, not very much, a little bit of French in there too. And but it definitely was not Michif as we know it, like out west. So every nation has a right to define and determine who they are. So it's not like, uh, there should never be identity police when it comes to a nation determining who they are. Because that's not right. We can't go to the United States and tell them who they are. And the United States can't come here and tell us who we are. Or we'll take them on again. Maybe that's what we should do, everybody. Let's ally up together again and fight the United States. See if we can get some of our land back here. But again, But what we do need to do is support each other in our efforts for our nationhood and for our lands and for future generations. That's really important. We have a beautiful opportunity to really strengthen and join forces for something beautiful. And it's not rights based, it's responsibility based. It's our responsibility to each other and to the lands and waters that we've always had. And that's powerful because right now our lands and waters are under attack by unethical and very destructive resource extraction. And our waters are being polluted en masse. Our territories are not being respected. And we need to join forces. And we need to stand up and rise up against these colonial forces that are destroying our lands. We were always like this. We must never let go of each other. Always, forever, we must be like this. It's so important. And we need to make our kids like that too. So if we're bickering and fighting with each other, our kids are going to be doing that because that's what they're going to learn. I never grew up that way. I grew up very proud of the Optuzia Nishnabek. Very proud of the Nishnabek people. Very, very proud. And so I want to thank all of you for listening. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to hear me babble on about how we need to unite for the earth. And that's something we've always done. So we can't stop the historical path that was made for us. We must continue to align ourselves with each other and defend our lands. This isn't political. This is spiritual. Our futures are at stake. Our languages need help. So we definitely always need to help each other and support each other. And I make a call out to my people, the Anishinaabeg Nation, to make sure that the Optuzia Anishinaabeg are always taken care of, that they're given everything that they need, the same way that we were given, or we had. That we can't resist the true rightful place of the Optuzia Anishinaabeg amongst the lands and waters. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. And I know that one day things are going to change. And it's through things like this. It's going to change through us, communicating, articulating, understanding the history, and really coming together in a good, positive way. And saying, you're the best. You're the best. And I think I'll leave it there. I'm very proud of the Optuzia Anishinaabeg for the good hard work that you're doing and for your kindness and for your generosity and for your stewardship. I have much respect for you and my heart goes out to all of you. So with that, I just want to say, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be able to speak with you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. But it's very humbling and very, very beautiful to be within your presence through this TV thingy here. So with that, Bama Pigwabnanim, Minwa, Aho. We'll see you later. Miigwech.